News headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Sunday News with Dan Rather.
Good evening. Before he resigned under pressure 3 weeks ago, H.R. Bob Haldeman was President Nixon's chief of staff, the one man closest to Mr. Nixon. Today, the Washington Star-News, quoting unnamed sources, says that former CIA Director Richard Helms told the Watergate grand jury that when Haldeman tried to enlist CIA aid in the scandal cover-up last year, Haldeman told Helms the request was coming from, quote, higher up. Haldeman, in an interview today with CBS's Connie Chung, would not specifically deny that, but he did issue his most emphatic denial yet that he or the president has been involved in any wrongdoing in any way.
Can you comment at all on the president's alleged involvement in the cover-up?
I can flatly say that the president was not involved in any cover-up of anything at any time. And as you know, I've also said that I feel that in the process of the investigation, I will have the opportunity to present the facts to these appropriate investigating bodies, that as a result of that, it will be completely clear to them and to the public in due course that I maintain the standards of integrity, excuse me, that I've always set for myself and that the President set for us. And I feel equally assured and certain that there will be no question as to any inappropriate or improper involvement of the President in any matter related to the Watergate at any time, in any way. As I've also told you before, I have no intention at all at any time of seeking immunity or of taking the Fifth Amendment. I will testify as fully as I possibly can, and I'm convinced that that is the proper way for these facts to be brought out, and that they will be.
Senator Sam Ervin, who heads the Senate Watergate hearing that resumes Tuesday, continues to emphasize that there are no present plans to ask for testimony from the president, nor to seek any written statement from him. On ABC's Issues and Answers, Ervin again rejected claims that his hearing is hampering Justice Department prosecution of the scandal.
I think this country has been suffering under this cloud cast by the Watergate bugging ever since last June. And frankly, I think it's more, as the government lacks, as Senator Javits stated some days ago, the government's almost at a standstill. And I think it's much more important to find out, for the American people to know, and for the Congress of the United States to know exactly what happened, than it is to get 1 or 2 people sent to jail.
A Time magazine telephone poll of 1,000 Americans shows that 58% of those reached believe President Nixon knew of the scandal cover-up. Now, telephone surveys are known in the trade as the most undependable among scientific polls, but for whatever it may be worth, the Time magazine poll indicates an even split in public opinion about whether Mr. Nixon knew in advance about the Watergate burglary and bugging itself. The president's younger daughter, Julie, said in an interview today that she doubts the scandal ever would force her father to resign. She said, quote, "I don't think he'd ever bug out."
Good evening. I'm Howard K. Smith in Washington.
I'm Harry Reasoner in New York. These are tonight's headlines. Senate investigators hear that H.R. Haldeman advised a CIA official that it was the president's wish that the CIA discourage a Watergate probe. Special Watergate prosecutor Cox says he has all the powers he needs and will carry through even to the president. John Mitchell pleads innocent in New York to charges of perjury and conspiracy. And the Supreme Court, by a 4-4 vote, stops consolidation of the schools in Richmond and its suburbs. Howard?
Officials of the Central Intelligence Agency rarely discuss sensitive matters in public. At the moment, no matter is more sensitive than an alleged effort by the White House to pressure the CIA into helping cover up the Watergate affair. Well, today the Senate Foreign Relations Committee held the first public hearings on that question, and for the first time, former CIA Director Richard Helms talked about it under the glare of television lights. ABC's Bill Zimmerman reports.
Helms could not recall whether the president's name was invoked last summer when White House staffers allegedly tried to involve the CIA in a Watergate cover-up. He remembered going to the White House with his deputy director, Vernon Walters, and meeting there with H.R. Haldeman and John Ehrlichman. And he remembered that Haldeman wanted Walters to go to the FBI and tell Acting Director Pat Gray that a further FBI investigation into alleged money laundering could interfere with CIA activities in Mexico. According to Walter's memorandum about that meeting, Haldeman told him it is the president's wish, but Helms didn't remember that.
You have said that you do not recall that the name of the president was invoked.
In the memorandum, Senator Percy, I believe he had a phrase that this was being done at the president's wish. I don't recall that this was precisely the case.
Do you remember the meeting specifically so that you could categorically state that the name of the president had never been invoked, or that the authority of the president specifically had never been invoked by them?
Well, the difficulty is, Senator Percy, that I simply do not recall anymore, and any other answer would not be an honest answer.
At first, the CIA went along with the White House request, but after 13 days, it terminated its involvement. Helms was praised highly by several senators for resisting White House pressure and standing up to what Hubert Humphrey saw as a grave danger to the country.
I think that this country is in mortal danger when agencies like the Secret Service can be used for political manipulation, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or in any way to compromise or prostitute the professional competence of the Central Intelligence Agency. And if that comes from the inner circle of the White House, then they have performed a greater disservice for this country than any other thing that they've done.
In another development, Senator Stuart Symington said today there was a proposal in the executive branch in the summer and fall of 1970 to increase the espionage role within the United States of the CIA and the Department of Defense. Symington quoted former White House employee Tom Charles Houston and said the plans appear to reflect recommendations and possibly decisions to permit violations of law in the domestic collection of intelligence on U.S. citizens. According to Symington, a copy of those plans was among the documents John Dean placed in a safety deposit box and turned over to the Watergate prosecution last week. Bill Zimmerman, ABC News, Washington.
A nationwide survey by Time magazine shows that 58% of those polled believe President Nixon knew of efforts to cover up what happened in the Watergate case. The same poll, which involved a telephone survey of 1,000 voters, showed 41% believe the president approved the bugging in advance, 41% don't believe that, and 18% had no opinion. In answering another question, 44% said that if it is shown the president did know in advance, he ought to be impeached. Former White House Chief of Staff H.R. Haldeman addressed himself today to the question of whether he or the president knew of cover-up efforts. ABC's Stephen Gear reports.
At 7:45 this morning, a White House courier delivered 2 envelopes to the doorstep of Haldeman's townhouse in the fashionable Georgetown section of Washington. An hour and a half later, Haldeman came out, volunteered to talk with us, and said he was not guilty of any wrongdoing. And he said the same about his former employer.
In no way was the president involved in any such acts or cover-up of acts, and I'm fully confident that that will be abundantly clear when the investigation is completed.
Are you willing to extend that statement to anyone else, Mr. Ehrlichman, for example?
I would not, as I say, respond to specific questions on any aspects of the case, and I think I should stay by that position.
Are you still working at the White House in any fashion?
No, not officially. I went off the official roles as of the end of last week, and I'm not working at the White House at all, but there is still some mail coming to me there, and there are some questions that arise from time to time in regard to matters that I was dealing with when I was at the White House, and so I'm of course available to anybody there who has any questions that I can be helpful on.
Are you still in communication with the president?
I have been, yes.
Concerning Watergate, among other things?
I'm not going to discuss any communication with the president, as I never have.
A moment later, Haldeman departed, destination unknown. It was Haldeman driving his own car, not riding in the chauffeur-driven limousine of times past. Stephen Gear, ABC News, Washington.
A number of influential senators have said they would not confirm Elliot Richardson as Attorney General unless they were satisfied with his choice for Special Watergate Prosecutor. Today, Richardson and Archibald Cox, the man he picked to investigate the case, appeared on Capitol Hill. The senators were pleased with what they heard, and speedy confirmation of Richardson appeared likely. Bob Clark reports.
From the moment Richardson picked Archibald Cox, Democrat, friend of Ted Kennedy, a man with impeccable legal credentials, it was obvious he had made the Senate an offer it couldn't refuse. While there was lengthy questioning at today's hearing, it was little more than formality. Senator Robert Byrd asked if Cox, as the Watergate prosecutor, would pursue the investigation to the end, even if, heaven forbid, as Byrd put it, the trail led directly to the Oval Office in the White House. The Harvard professor promised to follow the trail wherever it led. Richardson pledged complete independence to Cox, who was asked outside the hearing room what he would do if Richardson tried to interfere.
I would simply assert my position, and if there were, he still persisted, I think I'd have the whip hand, but if I found I didn't, then I would have to take steps in my conscience to report to the Senate committee or to the American people or in some other way.
I have made clear that from the beginning that I would not expect to second guess or to substitute my own judgment for the judgment of the special prosecutor.
What if President Nixon asked about the findings in the process of your investigation? What would you tell him?
Well, I would have to know exactly what he asked, but I can't imagine his doing it. If I thought it would prejudice the investigation in any conceivable way, I would tell him no.
There was praise for Cox from Republicans. Hugh Scott said the appointment reassures him there won't be any McCarthyism in the probe. Senate procedure calls for confirming Richardson first as Attorney General, then approving Cox, who could be on the job within a few days. Bob Clark, ABC News, Capitol Hill.
From CBS News headquarters in New York, Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. A CIA memo quotes then White House Chief of Staff Bob Haldeman just 6 days after Watergate as saying, quote, "It is the president's wish," unquote, to stop an FBI investigation of the laundering of campaign funds in Mexico. Mariah McLaughlin reports.
That memo was written after a meeting attended by CIA Director Richard Helms, his Deputy General Vernon Walters, and White House staffers Haldeman and John Ehrlichman. Walters wrote that memo, but Helms now says that he cannot remember any direct reference to the president made by Haldeman. Helms does recall that at the meeting, the Watergate break-in was mentioned, and he couldn't for the life of him figure out what a break-in at the Democratic headquarters had to do with Mexico.
As I recall it during the meeting, I made an effort to say, well, you know, what is the purpose of this? And the question was not answered. It was simply repeated. It's been decided that General Walters is going to go and see the acting director.
In other words, and when it was stated, it has been decided, was it your inference or understanding that that decision then had been made by the president and was therefore the authority by which you were being ordered to do this?
Well, sir, I can only say that since it was his chief of staff who was telling me to do it, I assumed that he had proper authority to do it.
Do you remember the meeting specifically so that you could categorically state that the name of the president had never been invoked or that the authority of the president specifically had never been invoked by them?
Well, the difficulty is, Senator Percy, that I simply do not recall anymore, and any other answer would not be an honest answer.
Senator Percy wanted to know why the CIA had given so-called technical assistance to E. Howard Hunt when Hunt didn't work at the CIA and the agency had no idea what he was up to.
It was simply because Mr. Ehrlichman had asked to be assisted for a White House function, and I must say that at that time, to recall, there was no indication that anybody was going to be guilty of any wrongdoing, and assistance to the presidency has not been a crime up until comparatively recently.
Helms said he always thought the CIA was protected from unnecessary pressure just because it came under the direct control of the White House. Maybe some new legislation is needed, Helms said, but how do you do it?
And I have to say to you, sir, that I don't know how you legislate character and honor and decency. It seems to me that the assumption that the White House is an embodiment of those things is something that's sort of rooted in our Constitution. And to try and legislate specifics to take care of unidentified contingencies, it seems to me is an enormously difficult thing to do.
The question still remains, did the president know what was going on, or were White House staffers merely using their positions and possibly the president's name to get what they wanted? Mariah McLaughlin, CBS News, Washington.
Senator Stuart Symington said today that the White House had secret plans to involve the CIA and the Department of Defense in domestic espionage, including burglary. But Symington said the plans never were put into effect. He spoke after hearing secret testimony by a former White House employee, Tom Charles Houston. And the senator said the plans are documented by materials which fired White House aide John Dean had put in a safety deposit box as well as by records from other sources. In New York today, John Mitchell and Maurice Stans, the former Nixon cabinet members and campaign chiefs, pleaded innocent to those conspiracy and perjury charges stemming from a big secret campaign contribution. Richard Roth reports.
John Mitchell, law and order man as Attorney General, and then Nixon campaign director until 2 weeks after Watergate, spoke barely a word to reporters as he entered the courthouse. Inside, Mitchell was joined by Maurice Stans, former Commerce Secretary, then chief fundraiser for the Nixon campaign, and Harry Sears, the president's New Jersey campaign chief. The indictment says Mitchell and Stans conspired with Sears to help financier Robert Vesco in a securities case in return for a campaign contribution of $200,000 cash. Mitchell and Stans are also accused of lying to the grand jury that investigated the case. John Mitchell, I am prepared, Your Honor, to plead not guilty. Judge John Cannella, do you so plead? I so plead. The same from Stans and Sears, a plea of not guilty on all counts. Assistant U.S. Attorney John Wing asked a $1,000 bond for each man. Judge Cannella, that's ludicrous. These men had to be investigated by the FBI before they held their high government jobs. The men were released without bail. Before he sped away, Mitchell was asked, how do you feel? I've been better. Richard Roth, CBS News, New York.
Judge Cannella also ordered Vesco's arrest, the second such bench warrant for him in this case, which is linked to the alleged looting of possibly $224 million in mutual funds. Vesco variously has been reported to be in the Bahamas and Costa Rica, and process servers have been unsuccessful in reaching him. As far as we know, the last time the elusive New Jersey financier was filmed was in March in Costa Rica, where he tried to explain to newsmen his failure to appear before a legislative panel.
I was not even aware that I was asked to come on Wednesday the 21st, and I have no one has bothered to tell me that.
Yo ni me daba cuenta que tenía que asistir a ninguna cita el miércoles 21, y nadie se ha molestado en decírmelo tampoco.
I mean, certainly if I'm giving adequate notice and there's a purpose to appear, I would be more than happy to.
The comings and goings of Robert Vesco in Costa Rica have been and remain a mystery. It's confirmed he's invested billions of dollars here, but exactly how much and where leads to wide speculation. It's rumored that this empty mansion will be Vesco's home in Costa Rica. It's said he's bought a network of gasoline stations, large tracts of real estate, control of local companies, and shares in La Nación, a major newspaper. No one really knows. Vesco has created a storm of political controversy in this small democratic republic. Public opinion now accuses him of buying off the government. $25 million of Vesco's money is known to be invested in Costa Rican government bonds. A Vesco investment of $2.5 million in a company partially owned by the president of Costa Rica is not denied. Reports from the United States widely circulated here link Vesco's name with $325,000, which have shown up in the president of Costa Rica's personal account in a New York City bank. Costa Rican President Jose Figueres bitterly denies this.
The Wall Street Journal says that $325,000 were deposited to my account. It's never been an amount of that size. There may be the total of whatever went through the account in a given period in a perfectly explainable manner. I'm not concerned. I never do anything wrong, sir.
San Jose's normally quiet airport has been the scene of unusual activity since Vesco first came here a year and a half ago. At least one, many times 4 or 5 small executive jets belonging to Vesco's associates are almost always on the scene. If Vesco is permitted to remain in Costa Rica, what is now a small provincial country could be converted into an international financial capital. George Nathanson, CBS News, San Jose, Costa Rica.
This is the KNBC News Service sign-off edition for Friday morning, the 18th of May. The time is now 1:01. In about 6 hours, the Senate Select Committee will resume hearings into the Watergate case. A key witness, convicted Watergate conspirator James McCord, is expected to testify today. A brochure from the Yorty campaign titled, "Your City, What Will Happen If the Wrong Man Becomes Mayor," wound up in court yesterday. Bradley forces got hold of some copies and filed suits. claiming the brochure had false statements in it. The Bradley people said the one statement called Bradley anti-police, another said Bradley was pro-Black Panther. A judge said the material couldn't be circulated if those statements were in it. 300,000 copies of the brochure had been printed by the Yorty campaign. Yesterday afternoon, they were stacked up at a mailing firm. It was set to go out in the mail today, but things didn't work out. After the court decision, candidate Tom Bradley talked to newsmen about the controversy.
That material contained such blatant lies, so scurrilous in their nature, that they were not even protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution. This whole matter, I think, ties in directly with our efforts to get a fair campaign practices agreement from Mayor Yorty. I offered to sign that, as did Bert Pines and Roger Arnberg, who are running for city attorney. Now, if we had agreed to sign it, why not Sam Yorty?
Yeah. Mayor, have you actually seen the campaign brochure in question?
No, I haven't.
Do you agree with the statement, in Bradley's district, the violent crime rate is the worst in Los Angeles, but Bradley's record on law enforcement is the worst in the city council?
I think it is. I think it is the worst. He not only has not helped us combat crime, but he's fought with every police chief since he's been in the office.
Judge Lucas has termed that statement a falsehood.
Well, he's not the judge. I mean, he was a judge, but he had no business going into all that. I mean,
he said
we have a right. We have a right to our
even the
opinion.
First Amendment didn't protect that statement. It's just
well, we have a right to express.
False.
We have a right to express our opinion, and that's what evidently was done in the brochure.
The brochure will be reprinted, and the material that the judge objected to will be dropped.
It's $9,000 down the drain for the mayor, but he says he'll print up just as many new brochures with the watered-down charges. Typically, his response was to issue a new charge of his own.
Well, I don't think it's any big thing. I think it's more important to know who stole the pamphlet, because we did not authorize the release of this, and the printer says he didn't. So you've got a kind of a little Watergate on your hands here. You've got political espionage that he's had to admit in order to take it into court and admit that he has it.
Someone who observed that material called our headquarters, told us about it, and brought it to us. There was no theft at all, no breaking and entering as he had suggested. Just a good citizen who wanted to be sure that the public knew the kind of vicious and scurrilous material that was being printed.
What about the question of prior restraint? As an attorney, as somebody interested in civil rights, doesn't this infringement on the First Amendment bother you a little bit?
Not at all, and it was observed that the material was so blatantly scurrilous and false that even the First Amendment of the Constitution could not protect it.